Raising children isn't easy and it can sometimes seem the worries are never ending. But should digital screens be added to the list of things to fear, or should they simply be embraced as part of parenting today? That question is causing debate both in families and in academia after a series of studies have come up with controversial guidelines. I'm Femi Oke, and you're in the stream. So you've probably thought about the impact of screen time on the mind of youngsters. This is a member of our community, Carl Marston. Have a listen.
When the World Health Organization issues a report like this that says that children should play more and sit less, what they're trying to do is just put an idea in our minds, because it's up to every individual parent to decide and set guidelines for their children's ability to use the internet. All they want to do is start the debate, the same kind of debate that we have here on the stream, which is that we don't really know what happens when kids grow up with the most advanced learning technologies that have ever existed yet.
So do you have an opinion? You can tweet it to us right now at @ADayStream. We're trying to fold it into this conversation. Now, in April, the World Health Organization issued new guidelines on how much time parents should allow young children to spend looking at screens, phones, tablets, or TVs. These are the key findings. Children younger than 1 year old should not have any screen time, and children aged 2 to 4 can have passive screen time capped at 1 hour a day. Passive screen time means, for example, watching a screen versus interacting with an app or playing a game. But are such limits and guidelines one size fits all? As Carl suggested just there in his comment to us, it has opened up a big debate. The Royal College of Pediatrics in the UK believes the evidence of screen harm is often overstated. It has also said that connections between screen time and negative effects are mainly due to its impact on socialising, exercise and sleep. So to help us navigate all of this conflicting information, Florence Breslin is a co-investigator at the Laureate Institute for Brain Research. Also joining us via Skype from Philadelphia, Jordan Shapiro. He's author of the book, The New Childhood, Raising Kids to Thrive in a Connected World. And Dr. Cara Baggott is an adolescent psychiatrist, assistant professor at the University of California, San Diego. It's good to have you all here, everybody. Jordan and Guess, I'm just wondering, the reason we're even debating this, are we scared of the screens that we have out there right now? Are we scared that we don't know what they're doing to our youngsters and to our babies? Is this conversation driven by fear, or because there may well be an educational impact on youngsters looking at screens?
Well, I think it's absolutely driven by fear. You know, all these devices are sort of here to stay. They're part of our lives, and while there's certainly good things to be concerned about, I think all of us have seen negative impact from screens. We've seen things like kids who seem easily distracted, kids who are too focused on video games, kids who have unhealthy relationships with their devices. I think that there's not really the research to back up that that's problematic, right? So I think we have to do a lot more of thinking about, I like to say, more mentoring and less censoring, right? We need to think about how do we raise our kids so that they can live in a healthy way with these screens, because I'm pretty sure they're here to stay.
I'm trying to work out what screen harm is. Could you explain that to me, Florence? Do you know what screen harm is? Could you give us a definition?
Screen harm is very, I think, dependent on any child. You know, if your child is using a device and having a negative consequence, like they're having tantrums when you take it away, or it's affecting their sleep, then that's a harm to them. But I do think it's very individualized to specific children and what they're doing, and then how that is affecting them. I don't think that a one size fits all, this is what's harmful, this is how it's hurting us. Yeah. I don't think we know that yet.
Cara, I'm just wondering, how do we get to a stage now where we've got some guidelines from the World Health Organization, so not even from a country or from a government, but from the World Health Organization saying if you're 1 or under, you shouldn't be looking at a screen?
Yeah, so I think we know what's important developmentally, especially for infants and children, especially at the age of 1 or infancy below age 1. We know that social development, communication is really, really important. And when you're staring at a screen, you're not learning in a traditional manner. So infants usually learn by communicating and having reciprocal conversations with others, reading other people's facial expressions. That's how we learn how to navigate the world. And if they're just passively looking at something, they're not learning those skills.
Guess I wanted to show you something. There are so many fascinating videos of youngsters looking at screens and being sucked into the screens. And of course, a lot of those studies, we can't show those videos, but I can show you an Instagram of my niece on her first birthday that I took of her. I'm going to take the audio down, but there's going to be a moment where she sees herself on the screen and then see what she does. So here we are. First birthday of my little niece. Let's play. She's looking at... Ooh.
Well, I have to say, this is going to be one of my...
Look at that. She's looking at herself. Who is that cutie pie? That's her at the screen. She stopped and looked at the screen, listening to her auntie, putting her on Instagram, and then you go back to her again, and then, look, she's making faces at the screen. So this is a 1-year-old doing that. So what is that doing, Florence, to a 1-year-old's brain, looking at that screen? Have I damaged her for life?
Probably not. And, most of my research is actually in older kids, but
Yeah.
A lot of younger kids, from what we see, when they look at screens, especially at that age, I think you see a little bit of the mirror effect. We used to do this, when my kids were babies, we put a mirror in their bed and they would make faces as soon as they saw themselves.
Yeah.
They would look at it and try to figure it out.
Yeah.
So I think that we're seeing a lot of that. And to kind of follow up with what Kara said, that's great. That is, whether they're looking in a mirror or they're seeing themselves reflected back in a screen, I don't think that that's necessarily problematic. The problem is if that's the majority or if that's a lot of the communication interaction that they have, that they're not getting that reciprocal back and forth, which is critical to their development. So looking at that screen, seeing themselves, not really problematic. If they're just looking at something else and they're not getting any feedback, they're not even seeing themselves, it's not, I don't know that it's necessarily that bad or that good or unharmful, but it's taking away time that they need to be spent doing other things. Infants sleep a lot. So when they are awake, it's those critical times to help their development, and passive screen viewing is not going to help in any of those areas.
And I think that the evidence also, so I think that the evidence is also not showing that kids, the video was adorable and your niece is adorable.
Thank you.
But I don't think that kids are really spending most of their time on screens looking at themselves.
Yeah.
The majority of the time that kids are spending on screens are watching other things. So while they are getting some of this mirroring effect, which we know is important for infancy, most of the time they're not actually doing that. They're passively watching or engaging with the screen. And so I think that is really the downside of it.
Jordan, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say one of the things I loved about that video, Femi, was that we saw the kid interacting, your niece interacting with adults, which means it was still having that sort of serve and response that's so important. And that's what I would really like to see in the world, is a lot more adults and children interacting with screens together and moving back and forth between screens and eye contact, which is exactly what we saw is happening in that video. So we end up doing both things. We end up both getting these great positive human interactions, but also sort of socializing the child to be able to make sense of a life lived with screens, which is presumably the kind of world that the child's going to grow up in, because I don't know of another one. So I thought that video was sort of a perfect example of what I love to see, which is what's called joint media engagement. Now, I completely agree with Kara, which is that if we have kids completely just staring at screens by themselves all day, I think that's a problematic thing. But I also think we should it's pretty hard to raise little kids. I have 2 kids, and it's really exhausting. I worry about the guidelines, like the World Health Guidelines, scaring parents into thinking that kids are going to get brain damage if you say, hey, how about I show you a video for 10 minutes while I take a shower? I wish that I had a way to keep my kid distracted for 10 minutes when it was a newborn, for example. But if that's happening all day, I think we certainly have a major problem.
Florence, there is a study, though, that looks at what may happen to youngsters who spend a lot of time passively watching a screen. And one study came out to say that perhaps their language ability wasn't as good, their cognition wasn't as good, that maybe the smart devices were making them stupid.
So we've seen several, kind of papers, and in a lot of the research that looks negatively at screen time gets a lot of publicity. We have done our own research on the Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development Study, which is a fairly large study. Our first papers were in the first half of the cohort, which is about 4,000 subjects. So they're not tiny groups. And we do see that if you have a lot of screen time, that we see some negative associations. But when we started breaking that down by different types of screen time, we saw that it wasn't all mutually exclusive. So we saw kids who were using social connections, whether it was social media or FaceTiming or video chatting or texting, and these are 9 and 10-year-old kids, so they're not, teenagers. They actually had less sleep problems. They had more physical activity. So it was not all equal. We looked at kids who spent a lot of time playing video games, and while we did see some correlations, these are not causational studies at this point, it's just looking at one time point, we saw correlations with kind of behavioral problems and some internalizing, externalizing problems, but we also saw slightly higher IQ scores in those kids, or crystallized intelligence scores specifically is what we are looking at. So we see that it's not universal.
Right.
And a lot of our research is...
Sorry, Florence. And I also just want to make the point, too, that it's, a lot of these studies, even the ABCD study, which I'm also involved in and Florence has been talking about, like we're looking at large cohorts of kids, but kids are fundamentally different. We're all fundamentally different, right? We all have different characteristics. And I think that may also contribute to sort of these findings. And so right now, the state of the literature is where we're lumping like large cohorts of infants, children, and or adolescents together and looking at sort of general outcomes. But we're not looking at differences between kids. We're not looking very closely at differences between types of screen time and seeing how those differences may affect sort of cognition, like you mentioned, may affect brain development, may affect sort of behaviors or psychiatric symptoms.
Right. Jordan, I know you want to come in here. Let me just show people just a little bit of this timeline of the ABCD study. This is a timeline of events. So this is ongoing, starting with a bunch of 9 to 10-year-olds. And the whole idea is that it goes up until then 19 to 20. So that's quite a long time. And the way that the people are being studied, our youngsters are being studied, their brain scans, they have to do tests, their time on the iPads, et cetera, et cetera. So we're not really going to understand this fully until these youngsters are actually fully grown adults. Jordan, go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think that's true. We're certainly not going to understand until they're fully grown adults. And I often think, every parent in history has had to deal with new things, a changing world. And I think that this is what we really need to think of as parents, as teachers, as caregivers. We need to go, if we're moving into a digital world, if we're moving into a connected world, how are we going to make sure that our kids can live healthily with these things, right? They're not going to go away. As both Florence and Kara have said, right, there's not really consistent across the board research showing us that it's toxic, that it's problematic. So what we really need to do is go, how are we going to build the kinds of attitudes, the kinds of parenting practices, the kinds of routines that make sure it's integrated into a healthy life that allows us to be able to do all the great human things, all the great human values, and then also put that together with these great new technologies. There's so many amazing things that these technologies have brought into our lives. And what I want to do is teach our kids how to leverage those technologies for kindness and for compassion and to have a better world, honestly.
I 100% agree with that.
Yeah, Cara, let me just come back to you because I'm going to get some of our community in because they love you three and they have questions and things for you. So as we have you here, I'm going to make you work. All right, this is Farhan. It's a challenge being a parent, and he sums that up beautifully. Have a listen to him.
Well, obviously, all parents want to stop the children from excessive screen time, but the problem is that there is no ready alternate available to this screen and YouTube and all this stuff available on the internet just so easily. So what we need is a right alternate to this thing. Books are obviously not an alternate. So we have to find something which can attract the children as much as the screen do. And that is the biggest challenge for the parents, I think.
Trying to find something as exciting and engaging as YouTube and social media. It doesn't look like Farhan has found it yet.
So I think we're getting away from, so like Florence, I mainly work with older children, like adolescent age. But I think when we're talking about screen time behaviors, we need to be talking with parents very, very early about these things before the kids are introduced to screens. So I'm a mother of two very young children, and I have another on the way. And these are things that I'm talking with my 3-year-old about now, and putting rules and sort of parameters around screen time into practice, so that when they age into the ages of wanting to be on YouTube and wanting to be on social media, and that's what their friends are doing and things like that, then they are doing those things appropriately, they're doing them responsibly, and I'm monitoring them.
Kara,
so I think putting those practices into place very, very early before the kids are involved in those things, I think are really important.
I love what you're saying here, Kara, because I've often said that that when they do the full surveys, they find that the average age we tend to give kids smartphones or devices is 11, right, or 13.
Jordan, I have to show you this. This is from Luckman. He's actually watching right now. Luckman says, "I am actually considering buying my 7 and 10-year-old brothers phones."
I love that.
Is that good? Should he do it?
I think it's so absolutely good. What I was going to say was that we tend to give it to kids when they're 11 and 13. That's when they hit puberty. That's when they start to be interested in risky behaviors. That's when their hormones start to rage. That's when they start to have aggression. I have a 13-year-old, and he suddenly doesn't want to listen to everything I say. When he was 7, all he wanted to do was be just like Dad. All he wanted to do was follow the rules. I think that's a great time to start teaching good habits, right? We wait until they're already ready to ignore us.
Luckman, your little brothers, go ahead, buy them a phone. All right, Florence, I have this one for you from Asma. She's loving the conversation, but Asma says, no matter how we try to limit their screen time, the way and manner they get involved with some gadgets, and they do it intelligently. So even if you try and stop it, there's always a way, Florence.
Well, there is. In our research, which, are 9 and 10-year-olds, but that's still fairly young, we actually see that the parent and the kid reports of how much time the child is spending on the screens don't match at all. That was one of them. When parents ask me what is the most shocking thing, and I don't know that it was really shocking, but that we see that the parents and the kids really don't the parents do not know how much time the kids are spending. And to kind of follow up on some items that have come up repeatedly, I think it's really important that we remember that not every child has the same opportunities. And I think that there's a lot of pressure saying screen time is the bad guy, screen time is the problem, where what the problem is there are definitely children who do not have the opportunity to do a lot of these other things. They don't have opportunities to play sports. They don't have opportunities to go play outside in their neighborhood. My children, we tell them, go outside and play. We have a brand new park right next to our house. Go play with your friends. But there are kids who don't have that opportunity, so they're spending a lot of time on screens. And I think that shows up in a lot of our research. Our research is highly significant based on family income, based on if it's a 1 or 2 parent home, and based on parental job status, if the parents have more than one job or not. So we have to remember that screens aren't always the bad guy or what's causing the problem. They are an option, especially in some families, and I'm sure in certain parts of the world where it's a very different cultures. So we need to be careful that we're just blaming them, because it's easy to say screens are bad, let's take them away, without giving another opportunity or fixing some of the problems where kids don't have these opportunities.
I feel that we're doing a screen time clinic right now, because F.A. Hamid says, AJ Stream, I immerse myself into books as a child. My children immerse themselves in YouTube. I have no idea how to control that, or should I even control them?
Well, when the printing press was invented, everyone was worried that kids were reading too many books, that they were going to be immersed into too deeply into books, right? Before that, most storytelling happened at church or around a campfire or in some kind of communal situation. And when books were first invented, everyone said, oh, they're going to have their nose in it. They're going to be so isolated. They're going to be so lonely. They're not going to develop any social skills.
Yeah. There is this question about guilt, though. As a parent, are you being guilted? Are you not bringing up your children in the right way if you allow them to spend an awful lot of time on tech, which is tech that's everywhere? Kara, what do you think?
So, I think Florence brought up a really good point. So some families, some parents just don't have the ability to provide other things for their kids, outside activities, right? So sports can be very expensive, like music, things like that can be very, very expensive. A lot of times the parents aren't necessarily in the home. And And so I don't know that guilt is the way to feel for those parents. Those parents really have no other option. And again, it's looking at this good versus bad. And again, it's just like the nuances of what the kids are doing when they're engaging in screen time activities. Some things are probably good for them, some are bad for them. Some probably lead to sort of social communication that they wouldn't get otherwise.
Sure.
You know, I think about autism spectrum populations, for example, that have a really hard time communicating with others in person. But like multiplayer video gaming could be really helpful for those kids because they can engage with others around an activity that they are very interested in, and they have very oftentimes restricted activities that they're interested in. So again, I think it's hard to think about like bad versus good. Should you feel guilty versus not feel guilty without talking about the nuances?
The obvious thing that's come from this conversation quite powerfully from our online community is it's not easy being a parent. Here's Nana. Nana not only sent us a video comment, she followed it up with a tweet. Part 1. Nana, go ahead.
So reducing screen time for my daughter also meant that the adults in the house reduced their own screen time. It involved getting more books, getting more audiobooks.
So Nana was saying that the adults had to look at their screen time to help the kids do it as well. And so she's got paints, books, an expensive French audiobook which got ruined in 2 days. So she's trying, but they are kids and they are learning. Florence, I love what you were saying about sending the kids out. Is that another alternative? That doesn't cost money necessarily, and that's another way. Or do parents, are they too scared to do that? Go play outside.
You know, I think there is a shift. When I was a kid, we were outside more than I think that kids in my kids' generation are. And there's something behind that. There's fear out there and what's going on. You know, we see these stories on social media where kids went to the park by themselves and people called the police on those parents. Because we have this idea that we should always be with our kids. We should be monitoring every minute of every day. So it makes it very hard. And then also there are definitely kids around this country and around the world who don't have a safe place to go outside and play. You know, I always tell my kids, hey, you have somewhere you can go outside. When they're like, well, my friends do this. I'm like, well, they don't live in our neighborhood. They may not have a safe place where they can play outside. I do think giving kids safe places and opportunities to do things, obviously playing outside is great for their interpersonal, you know, connected social development, which you lose a little bit of that when you're doing it via screens. It's good, obviously, exercise, which is really important for them. So there's a lot to be had for it. But like Kara said, I don't want to talk about it just being good or bad, because that may not be an option for every family. And if a mom's like, well, my kids aren't safe if they go outside, the neighborhood we look in has high crime rate or gun violence or drug problems, and then we're like, well, you can't let them have screens either, you know, you're kind of limiting them. So I think it's important to talk about, you know, what are the best types of screen times. As we figure that out, are there things that are better than others so we can, you know, help direct it instead of this kind of message that it's bad, because it's not going away. And we need to teach parents how to best use it rather than just try to make everybody feel bad about it, because that's not helping.
I want to put all of you on the spot and ask you in a sentence the idea of a universal guideline from the WHO. Kara, instant reaction to that.
You know, so
instant reaction, Kara.
So you would.
I said it was a hot spot. Go ahead.
I don't think there are any universal guidelines. I think different kids need different things.
Jordan.
I would say parents should acknowledge the screens are now a part of life and really get involved in thinking about how to create healthy screen behaviors.
Florence.
I think parents need to look at their individual children and decide what's best for them within the resources and options that they have.
All right,
and if screen's part of that, great. And if it's not, that's probably great too.
All right, Kara, good luck with the baby. What's the first tech device you're going to buy for your baby? What is it going to be?
First tech device.
Yeah.
Won't be for a very, very long time. So I'm sure that there will be something cool and new out in 5 years from now.
That we haven't even imagined that it's even possible.
That we haven't even imagined yet. Yes.
And we will probably have to do a show about that tech device in the future and how to deal with it.
Yes.
All right, it's been such a pleasure. Our online community have obviously loved chatting to you. Florence Breslin, Jordan Shapiro and Kara Bagot. The conversation continues online. Is screen time a good idea? What is your input? You can tell us at AJ Stream. We're always on Twitter. But that wraps up our discussion for now. See you online. Take care, everybody.